Hi everyone! In this video, I'm going to do a very broad general overview of all of the Canadian English consonant sounds. Okay, I'm going to take you through this consonant chart. And for each consonant sound, I will talk about where in the mouth that sound is produced, how we produce it, and the symbol, the phonetic symbol that we'll use to represent each sound. Remember that consonant sounds are usually described using three parameters of sound. First is place of articulation. Again, that's the where we're making that sound. Manner of articulation, and that's the how we are modifying the air to make the sound. And whether the sound is voiced or voiceless. That's whether or not we have vibration in the vocal folds. Okay. In the consonant chart, if you look at the consonant chart, you can see how these three parameters of sound are represented and organized. Looking across the top of the chart, you see place of articulation, and place of articulation is organized into columns. Okay, starting at the leftmost column, you've got bilabial, so sounds involving the lips. And as you work rightwards in the chart, you're actually moving farther and farther back in the mouth. So starting the first column again being lips, and then you've got teeth, lips and teeth, and then just teeth, and then you've got alveolar sounds, palatal sounds, velar sounds at the back of your throat, and the glottis. Okay, so moving backwards in your vocal tract. Manner of articulation is remember how we are modifying that sound, and that's organized into rows, starting with stops, where you actually stop the air, make a complete obstruction of the air, and then releasing it. Whether it's fricatives, so a continuous release of air, but with friction, okay, and so on, working your way down row by row, how we make the different sounds. Within the manner row, there may be a voiceless, voiced distinction. So if it's relevant, if we have a distinction between voiceless and voiced, that'll be indicated there. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to look at each manner of articulation, starting with stops, and I'll just go through all of the stops. So working my way through the vocal tract, okay? When I say stops, I'm talking about oral stops here. Oral meaning sounds that are coming through the mouth. Okay, so we're going to obstruct the air and then release it through the mouth. Starting with bilabial stops. Obviously, putting your two lips together, you've got p and b. Okay, so p, b, p, being the voiceless bilabial stop. So that means, again, there's going to be voiceless means no vibration. P, p, p. And voiced bilabial stops means there will be vibration. B, b, b. So p, b, p, b. So stopping the air and then releasing it through the mouth. So p, pat, b, bat, pat, bat. Okay, so that's bilabial stop. Now let's take a look at the next set of stops, oral stops in English, and that's called the alveolar stops. So remember that the alveolar ridge is behind the teeth. The bony ridge, so if you take your tongue and you feel behind your teeth, you'll feel that bony ridge, the alveolar ridge. If you place your tongue, if you let your tongue touch behind your teeth on that alveolar ridge, you get these two stops. T, d, t, d. So my tongue tip is touching behind my teeth, voiceless, t, voiced, d, right? T, d. So tan, dan, tip, dip. Okay, so voiceless, voiced, alveolar stops. Tongue is touching behind the teeth on that alveolar ridge. Okay, t, d. Now let's go to the velar stop. So the velar, again, is at the back. Let's see, the back of your throat, back of your mouth here, and you're using the back of your tongue, right? So the back of your tongue is hitting in the back of your throat, and voiceless, k, k, k. Voiced, g, g, g. Okay, so cut, cut versus gut, gut. So whether it's voiceless or voice. Those are the oral stop consonants in English. So we've got p, b, t, d, and k, g. Okay, stops. Now let's move down to fricatives. So unlike stops, with fricatives, you do not stop the air, but you are bringing your articulator very close to somewhere in your mouth, and that's going to cause vibration of the air, or friction, I guess is a better word. So fricative, friction. So that's going to cause friction in the airflow. So it's not stopped, it's continuous, but there is friction in the airflow. So let's look at the first set, labiodental fricatives. Okay, so labiodental is the top teeth on the lower lip, right? So if I put my top teeth on the lower lip, voiceless is no vibration here. And notice I'm not stopping the air. So the air is continuously flowing out of the mouth, but there's that friction sound. If I turn on my vocal folds, and I can feel tickling vibration on my lip there. So fan, fan versus van, van. Okay, it's labiodental. Now just dental, so no, not using the lips, but you have your tongue tip between your teeth. That's interdental, between the teeth. Voiceless and voiced. Okay, so voiceless would be like think, think, thank, thought, right? Thick. Versus the voiced as in the and than, weather. Okay, so when you were making, I know that the TH sound is quite difficult for most of the world's languages. What you want to make sure you're doing is you want to make sure you can kind of see your tongue doesn't have to be sticking way out like that, but there's usually a little, the tip of your tongue is just peeking out, right? Just barely peeking out, but you need a continuous flow of sound. Thick, thin, or the, than. That's interdental. Tongue tip kind of just peeking out between your teeth. Interdental fricatives. Okay, next will be the alveolar fricatives. So remember when we made the alveolar stops, our tongue tip was touching that bony ridge, the alveolar ridge behind the teeth, t-d, right? But when we make the fricative, our tongue is approaching, it's very close to that alveolar ridge, but not touching, it's not stopping the air, okay? S, s, z, z. So your tongue tip is very close to that alveolar ridge, but not stopping the air. The air is continuously flowing out of your mouth with a friction sound. If it's voiceless, s, and if it's voiced, z. Okay, sip, sip versus zip, zip, right? Sip, zip. Okay, that's the alveolar fricatives. Now, alveopalatal. So remember, if the alveolar ridge is that bony ridge behind your teeth, if you take your tongue and move it back along the roof of your mouth, you can feel that your roof of your mouth raises up into a bony area or a hard area right above the roof of your mouth. That's called the palate. So when we've got some fricative noises that come when our tongue is kind of between the bony ridge and the palate, we call that alveopalatal. So you're not so much the tip of your tongue, now you're more like using the blade of your tongue or just behind the tip of your tongue, and you're letting that part of your tongue raise up between the alveolar ridge and your palate. So instead of s, which is alveolar, we're going to move it slightly back. Shh, shh, like that sound. Shh, be quiet. Shh. So you're bunching your tongue up. It's not your tongue tip. You're just kind of bunching your tongue up, and it's moving backwards in your mouth. Shh, shh. Okay. And the voiced version of that is zh, zh. So shh, zh, shh, zh. And notice you can see that my lips are kind of protruding or pressed out words, right? Shh, zh, shh. You can see my teeth. Shh, zh, ship, ship, shake, right? Sheep. Zh is a relatively less common sound, and it usually occurs intervocalically or at the end of a word. So something like vision, vision, right? Or garage, garage, beige. Okay. So those are the alveopalatal fricatives. Let's move to the glottal fricative. So glottis, remember, the glottis is just that space between the vocal folds in your throat. So the glottal fricative sound, really your mouth is not doing anything. There's no real, your mouth is not really doing anything, but what's happening is your air is coming through the glottis, okay? And we can make a whispery sound, just breathing. That's air coming through the glottis. That's the, I'm going to say H, right? The phonetic symbol will just be H. Okay, so it's a glottal fricative because it is a friction sound. You can hear friction, but you're not modifying anything in your vocal tract. You're just sort of creating friction at the glottal area. Okay, so that's the glottal fricative, and there's only voiceless glottal fricative. Okay, now let's move. We've done stops, we've done fricatives. We're going to move on to affricates. Affricates are complex consonant sounds. So they consist of sort of two things. First, stop, and then fricative. So you're going to make a stop, you're going to stop the air, and then you're going to release it into a fricative. Okay, so we only have one set, and it's the alveopalatal affricates. Okay, so the first one is ch, ch. And the voiced version is j. So let's take a look. You can see in the symbol, when we use the phonetic symbols, we use the symbol t and the fricative sh to show that you're stopping the air. So let's do the voiceless affricate first. You articulate the t. So you start by articulating that voiceless alveolar stop, t. But then you release it into the fricative, t, sh. Right? So it's kind of a messy sound, right? Ch. The voiced version of that affricate is you're articulating the d stop, and then you're releasing it into j, d, j, d, j, j, j. So I'll really exaggerate that. J, d, j, j. So voiceless, ch, voiced j. Church, child. So that's the voiceless one, right? Child, church. The voiced affricate is j, jump. Jack, Jill, jump. Okay, so that's the affricates. Next, we're going to go with the nasals. Let's look at the nasals. These are called nasal stops. So that means just like oral stops, you're actually going to create an obstruction or stop the air somewhere in your mouth, but the air is allowed to travel up and out through your nose. So the first one is bilabial nasal stop, right? So two lips together. So unlike the oral stops, the nasal stops can continue, right? Because even though I've made an obstruction here by closing my two lips, the sound is allowed to come out through the nose. And you can tell that it's nasal because if you plug your nose, it's going to block the sound. Okay, so that's why it's called a stop. Okay, so you're stopping the air with your two lips in the bilabial nasal stop, but you're allowing the air to come out through your nasal cavity. So as in man, mother, moon, two lips together. Okay. The alveolar nasal stop. So now alveolar sounds, remember your tongue, you're going to stop the air by having your tongue touch that bony ridge behind your teeth, the alveolar ridge, just like t and d, right? But you're just going to stop it there and let the air come out your nose. As in nice and normal and nail, right? You can see my tongue is touching behind the teeth on that bony ridge. Okay, and the last nasal stop we have is velar. So again, that's the back of your throat here, the back of your mouth, and you're using the back of your tongue, right? So back of your tongue touching behind the back of your mouth, just like k, g, but this nasal sound is So I'm stopping the air at the back of my mouth. In English, we have no words that begin with this sound, but we have words that end with this sound, as in sing, ring, thing. So you're stopping here, and air is flowing through your nose. Sing. Okay, so that's the nasal stops. Now we'll go to the liquids and glides. I'll talk about that kind of together. Liquids and glides are sounds where there's not as much of an obstruction, so you're not closing off any part of your vocal tract. You're allowing the air to come through, but it's relatively unobstructed. So you don't hear that friction sound. It's quite more of a fluid sound or a melodic sound. Okay, so you don't have that noise. It's not noisy. So the first category are the liquids. Think of liquid as flowing, right? So these sounds more like flow out of your mouth, if you can imagine that. And so the first one is alveolar, the alveolar liquid. And so remember, with the alveolar sounds, your tongue tip has to be on that alveolar ridge behind your teeth. So this would be tongue tip behind your teeth and allowing the air to escape along the sides of your tongue. Oh, 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 like, love, living, oh. So that's a nice melodic sound, right? Tongue tip, the alveolar behind the teeth, the alveolar ridge, and air is just flowing along the sides of the tongue. Oh. The other one is somewhat difficult often for learners, and that's er. And in Canadian English, we call that a retroflex R. So with this sound, your tongue is quite tense. Sometimes we talk about the tongue, if this is your tongue, I don't know, it's retroflex means, retro means kind of going back, right? So we say your tongue is kind of curled back. So your tongue tip is not touching anything on the roof of your mouth. You're not touching. Unlike O, where your tongue tip is touching, with your tongue tip is not touching anything, okay? Your tongue is bunched up, it's bunching up in your mouth, and the sides of your tongue are pressing against your upper back teeth. If I can show that to you. The sides of my tongue are actually touching the back of my teeth, the upper part, the back of my teeth. And the tongue is bunched up, maybe curled more to the back. And notice, This is what your mouth should look like. Quite tense, and the lips are kind of pushed forward a little bit. Race, run, rise, So So lock, rock, rock. Okay, those are the liquids. And last, glides, the w and y. So the bilabial glide. We call it bilabial because your lips are completely round. W. You're using both your lips. W. So at the beginning of a word, this is a consonant stop, a consonant sound. W, as in win and weather, right? W. And we will, when we talk about vowels, you will see that we will need to use this glide sound. We'll factor into some of our English vowels at the end of a vowel sound. We will call those off glides. But at the beginning of a word or at the beginning of a syllable, it's a consonant sound. W, win, would, wonder, w. And last one is the palatal glide. So remember, the palate is just the roof of the mouth. Y, y, y. The body of your tongue is drawn up very close to the palate, the roof of your mouth. Y. Not stopping, right? Y. It's continuous flow of air. Y. And you can feel the sides of your tongue also touching the upper teeth. Y. And tensing up that tongue. Y. Yes. Yellow. Young. Yes. Yellow. Young. Yeah. Okay. Wow. So that's all of the consonant sounds in Canadian English. We talked about place of articulation. We talked about manner of articulation. Have a look at the different symbols that we're using. Most of the consonant sounds, the symbols that we use, look like the alphabet letters, right? Like p, b, s, z, t, d. Make a note of which symbols are actually different, such as the interdental fricatives, the TH sounds. They have special symbols, right? And the fricatives, the alveolar fricatives, sh, zh, need to have special symbols, as well as the affricates, ch, j, and the velar nasal. So those are the special symbols that you do need to know, but the rest are pretty straightforward. Okay, so those are the consonant sounds. I hope that helps.